Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm making a Raglan sweater for Feeple, my Feeple65 Chloe. As usual, the pattern is available on my website and is free for personal use. You can use any kind of stretchy material to make this, but I'm actually using material from an old cardigan, so I'll be making use of the finished edges it was originally made with. There are only 4 pieces to this pattern. The sleeves have a distinct front and back. The higher point at the top is the back, while the lower point is the front. The front of the sweater has a lower, wider top, and the back has a taller, narrower top. To assemble the sweater, line up the angled seam at the top of the sleeve with the angled seam at the top of the front and back. The front and sleeve here get pinned together with right sides together. Then the sleeve and back get pinned with right sides together. And I pin the other sleeve to the front with right sides together, so that all 4 pieces are connected at the shoulder. These seams get sewn with a simple straight stitch. It doesn't matter which direction you sew, up or down, but make sure you backstitch at the neckline to lend more strength to that seam. While I'm here, I wanted to extend a huge thank you to my supporters on Patreon. Your support is what lets me produce these videos and patterns, and as my projects become bigger and more complicated, it really does make all the difference. Thank you so much. I sew all 3 of the pinned seams together, and then finish the edges with a zigzag stitch. The zigzag isn't actually necessary since knit fabric doesn't fray, but I feel like it gives a more polished end result. When working with stretchy fabrics like knits, it's a good idea to make sure you're using a stretch needle, and using a longer stitch length can help prevent your garment from getting stretched out as you sew. I clip all the loose threads, then it's time to finish the neck. This pattern is designed with a nice wide open neckline so it's easy to pull the sweater on over a doll's head. So there's nothing fancy needed to finish the collar, just fold the edge to the inside by about 1/4 inch, pin it down and sew. The knit fabric stretches and flexes as needed, so those tight corners at the top of the sleeves won't be hard to turn. The collar is sewn with a regular straight stitch. I'm using a stitch length of about 3 mm, which helps this shrink back to a normal size when I'm done sewing. You'll have to excuse me if my voice disappears. I have the first cold of the season and it's making this difficult. At this point, the collar is finished and you'd normally hem the ends of the sleeves. This would be done by folding the end of the sleeve in by about 1/4 inch up to 1/2 inch and sewing it down. But since I'm using fabric cut to utilize the original hems of the sweater, I have no need to finish these sleeves. Instead, I move on to the next step, which is sewing the last shoulder seam closed. This is the back shoulder seam, and once again, the back and sleeve go together with right sides together. I pin the pieces in place, sew the seam closed with a regular straight stitch, and then finish the seam with a zigzag stitch, just like the other shoulder seams. Once again, I make sure to backstitch at the neckline because this point will get pulled on a lot, so it's good to lend this part some extra strength. Most of the construction is done now. Finishing will be fast. With the sweater wrong side out, I pin one side closed from the end of the sleeve along the bottom open edge of the sleeve, down the side of the sweater to the bottom hem. When working with stretchy materials, I like to pin at the sleeve cuff, the bottom hem, and at the seam in the underarm, and then add pins between those points to ensure everything is lined up properly and doesn't get stretched out of shape. To finish this seam, I use a straight stitch, backstitching at both the beginning and end of the seam. This seam goes up the side of the sweater and across the bottom of the sleeve all in one go. Then, like with the shoulder seams, I finish with a zigzag stitch for a neater edge. The other side of the sweater is still open. If you're using material with an unfinished bottom edge, this is the time to fold the hem to the inside by 1/4 or 1/2 inch, and then sew it down with a straight stitch. But once again, that's not necessary for my sweater, so I move on to the final step and pin the other side of the sweater closed, the same way as the first side. Pin in the underarm, sleeve cuff, and bottom hem, then pins in between. The same as the other side, I sew this closed with a straight stitch, backstitching at the bottom of the hem, sewing up the side of the sweater, turning to sew across the bottom of the sleeve, and then finishing the sleeve cuff with backstitching so it won't pull apart. Then this edge gets finished with a zigzag stitch. I can cut all the remaining loose threads and it's finished. The simplicity of this sweater makes it great for beginners. Once it's done, I turn it right side out and it'll be time to dress for new photo ideas. You can see my super graceful method for turning sleeves right side out. I mean, if it seems stupid but it works, it's not stupid, right? And that's all for today. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you subscribe so you won't miss out on my future tutorials and free patterns. Thanks for joining me again. Bye.